Welcome to another of my true crime tales, and for this video I'm going to digress from my usual coverage of murders to bring you the strange story of Mrs. Dorothy Hill and her brush, quite literally, with death. Suppose you were to answer a knock at your front door one day to find an undertaker standing there who informs you that he has come to collect your body for burial. Imagine the shock. Well, that's exactly what did happen to 31-year-old Mrs. Dorothy Hill. This is her story. Although she didn't know it at the time, the first hint of the ordeal that lay ahead for Dorothy occurred on the afternoon of Friday the 14th of September 1934, when a mysterious telegram arrived at her house in Elmstead Avenue, Wembley, asking that she send a death certificate to her childhood home in the village of Bilton in Yorkshire, where her mother and siblings still resided. Thinking it a mistake, she ignored it. Around noon the following day, Saturday the 15th of September, there came a loud knock at her front door. "My housekeeper answered it," Dorothy later told the Daily Independent. The next minute she came running in to say that there was an undertaker at the door. "I went to the door and the undertaker said, 'I have come for the body.' I thought he had made a mistake in the address, so I told him there was no one dead at my house and asked him whose body he had come for. He said, 'Mrs. Hill's.' I was so amazed that for a moment I could not speak. Then I saw the amusing side of it and said, 'Well, I am Mrs. Hill, but as you can see I am very far from dead, so you will have to take me as I am.' On looking into the road, I saw a motor hearse standing there with a coffin inside. The nameplate on the coffin had actually been prepared, giving the date of my death." If Dorothy thought that her day couldn't get any weirder, she was wrong, for the next moment a car pulled up behind the hearse and out climbed her brother-in-law, who had driven from Hull. He was carrying a bouquet of flowers which was to be placed on the coffin for the journey north to Bilton, where Dorothy's family were making the arrangements for her funeral and her subsequent interment in the family vault. "When he saw me, he was dumbstruck," Dorothy told the newspaper, "and he just stared at me as though he had seen a ghost." It transpired that Dorothy Hill and her family had been the victims of a cruel hoaxer. Dorothy hailed from the village of Bilton near Hull, where her mother and other family members were still residing. A few months previously, the family had suffered the death of Dorothy's father, and the bereavement had hit his widow, Mrs. Bramley, extremely hard, so much so that she had gone to the seaside town of Bridlington to recover and to come to terms with her loss. On the afternoon of Friday the 14th of September, a telegram had arrived at Mrs. Bramley's bungalow in Bilton. Since she was not there, it was taken in by her son, who opened it and read the awful news. "Dolly died this evening. Kindly wire instructions, Elmstead Avenue." According to various newspaper accounts, the telegram bore the name and address of a man who was well known to the family, although he wasn't actually named in any of the many articles that covered the story. Mr. Bramley and his brother-in-law immediately drove to Bridlington, where they broke the awful news to Dorothy's mother, whose shock can only be imagined. They all returned to Bilton, where they began making the melancholy arrangements for Dorothy's funeral and burial. The first thing that had to be done, however, was to get Dorothy's body transported from Wembley to Bilton, and to that end her brother and brother-in-law visited local undertaker E.W. Annison of the funeral directors T.S. Annison and Son. Interviewed by the Leeds Mercury on Sunday the 16th of September, Mr. Annison gave an account of what followed. "I was consulted on Friday by Mrs. Dorothy Hill's brother and her brother-in-law. They showed me a telegram purporting to relate to the death of Mrs. Hill and asked me to undertake the funeral arrangements, as it would be the desire of Mrs. Hill's mother that her daughter should be buried at Bilton. I left Hull with a hearse at 4 a.m. on Saturday, accompanied by a driver. We arrived at Wembley about noon. I had a note of the address at which I was to call. A woman answered the door. I told her I had come for the body of Mrs. Dorothy Hill. The woman told me that that was her name, and she added, 'I don't look like wanting you this morning.' She telephoned the police and dictated a long telegram to her mother to tell her that she was quite well. I had arranged to take measurements and telephone them to Hull so that the coffin could be ready on our return. Instead, I sent a telegram which stated, 'Coffin not required. Over the next few days, Dorothy Hill became something of a national celebrity as newspaper after newspaper covered her bizarre story under headlines such as "Woman's shock as her coffin arrives," "Strange London affair, hearse sent to house, woman who was reported to be dead appears at door," "Coffin ordered in Hull," "Cruel hoax of Hull family, a false death announcement," "Door answered by dead woman, Undertaker gets a surprise," "Woman walks to the door and finds her funeral waiting for her," "Funeral hoax, Undertaker met by dead woman," "I am alive," said woman to Undertaker, who came with coffin, and "Undertaker calls for the body, dead woman goes to the door. Amazing hoax." One newspaper even published a photograph of her, along with one of her house, showing the hearse parked outside it, although I have to say that it seems a little suspicious that a press photographer just happened to be on hand to capture the moment for posterity, and the person busying themselves in the driveway to the side of the house appears to be oblivious to the hearse parked on the road outside. Just saying. For the family, however, the ordeal was anything but humorous, coming as it did so close upon the death of Dorothy's father. Mrs. Bramley, Dorothy's mother, described it as a cruel and wicked hoax. Dorothy herself told the newspaper, "Someone has perpetrated a hideous and cruel hoax. It was a dastardly thing to do, because my mother has been so ill since father died, and the shock might have killed her." Meanwhile, her brother-in-law was even less forgiving. "It is a cruel hoax," he told a reporter from the Sunday Express. "Horsewhipping is too good for the man who did this." On Monday the 17th of September, the Daily Express informed readers, "Woman to sue hoaxer who said she was dead." "This is the climax of a persecution which has been aimed at me for some time," Dorothy was quoted as saying in the subsequent article. "I have said nothing about it previously, but I can stand it no longer. My mother is lying seriously ill in Hull. I believe this trick has been played to strike at me by worrying or harming her. I have already informed the police. Tomorrow I shall obtain advice to see what action I can take against the person who perpetrated this cruel hoax." However, what happened from that point on, I am sadly unable to reveal, as the newspapers either lost interest in the case or there was simply nothing further to report. Which of course leaves the question, who sent the telegram? The Leeds Mercury, in its edition of Tuesday the 18th of September, reported that members of the family state that the name on the telegram sent to Mrs. Bramley from Wembley, saying that her daughter had died and asking for instructions to be wired, is that of a man well known to them. No time was lost in furnishing the police with the description of the man suspected of the hoax, and detectives called and were given full information of what had occurred. Mrs. Bramley said that members of the family were determined to make every endeavour to support her daughter in her efforts to bring the perpetrator to justice. However, neither the Mercury nor any other newspaper actually named the suspect, and since there are no references to a prosecution being undertaken, it is possible that the parties simply sorted the matter out between themselves. Reading between the lines, I do have my own suspicion as to who it was, albeit I must stress that this is nothing more than conjecture and speculation on my part. The one person who wasn't mentioned in any of the newspaper articles was Dorothy's husband, Mr. Hill. In fact, it is safe to say that he is conspicuous by his absence from the reporting of the case. Her mother, brother, brother-in-law and sister were all mentioned. Even a close friend of Dorothy's, who was identified simply as a girl from Bradford, was quoted by several papers as saying, "I was with her a few weeks ago. I too received a telegram announcing her death. I was terribly upset." Dorothy was quoted in the Sunday Express as saying, "I can hardly explain it. I have been sharing this house, but this morning I came here to collect my things. Then the hearse came. It was all too awful." A few days later, the Daily Independent reported that Mrs. Hill was now staying with friends in Alperton, and yet again there was no reference to her husband. I suspect that Dorothy and Mr. Hill were separated and were possibly going through a divorce, especially given Dorothy's assertion that she had come back to the house to collect her things. Couples going through the throes of a separation have been known to do horrible things to each other, so is it possible that the man, well known to the family, who was responsible for the hoax, was in fact Dorothy's estranged husband? As I say, this is nothing more than speculation on my part. Who do you think was responsible for the hoax? Do you agree that it may well have been the estranged husband, or do you think a different person notified Dorothy Hill's family of her demise? Let me know in the comments section below. As for me, I am curious to know, if it was her husband, did he receive the threatened horsewhipping that Mrs. Hill's brother-in-law told the Sunday Express he so richly deserved? I hope that you have found this true crime tale interesting. If you have, please be sure to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel. And until we meet again in the dark and mysterious labyrinth of England's true crime underworld, stay safe and be careful about who you answer the door to.